My parents drained my college fund for my golden sister's third wedding, then asked me to pay for her divorce lawyer. All right, Reddit. I need to get this off my chest because, honestly, my head's been spinning with everything that's gone down with my family. I'm 28, male, and I haven't talked to my parents or my sister, let's call her Jessica, in almost 3 years. This is going to be a long one, but you need the background to understand just how messed up this whole situation is. Growing up, it was always about Jessica. She's 2 years older than me, and from day one, my parents treated her like she walked on water while I was basically furniture that occasionally needed to be fed. Jessica could do no wrong in their eyes, even when she was clearly screwing up her life in spectacular fashion. I remember when I was 8 and Jessica was 10, she borrowed $20 from my birthday money to buy candy. When I told my parents, they said I was being selfish and should share with my sister. When Jessica failed her driving test 3 times because she kept texting during the exam, my parents bought her a brand new Honda Civic to boost her confidence. Meanwhile, I worked 2 part-time jobs in high school just to afford gas money for the beat-up pickup truck I bought with my own savings. The pattern was set early and never changed. Jessica was the princess who needed protection and support, while I was expected to be the responsible one who could handle anything life threw at me. It didn't matter how many times she screwed up or how well I was doing. The narrative was always the same. In high school, Jessica dated this older guy named Sam, who was clearly bad news. Dropped out senior year, dealt drugs, had already been arrested twice. My parents thought he was misunderstood and just needed a chance. When he got Jessica pregnant junior year, they paid for everything. The doctor visits, the procedure, therapy afterward. They even let Sam move into our house for 3 months because his parents had kicked him out. Around the same time, I was working my ass off to maintain a 3.8 GPA while juggling those 2 jobs. I'd gotten accepted to 3 different state universities and was planning to study mechanical engineering. Did my parents throw me a celebration dinner? Nope. Did they even acknowledge my achievements? Barely. They were too busy dealing with Jessica's drama and making sure Sam felt welcomed into the family. That's when my grandfather on my mom's side stepped in. Grandpa Joe was a retired Navy veteran who'd worked his way up from nothing to eventually own a small chain of auto repair shops. He was the only family member who seemed to recognize that I was actually trying to build something with my life. Your parents are making a mistake, he told me one evening when I was working late on a school project in his garage. They think they're helping Jessica by solving all her problems, but they're just making her weaker. And they're ignoring the kid who actually has his head on straight. Grandpa Joe offered to pay for my college education. Tuition, room, board, everything. I was incredibly grateful, but I also felt uncomfortable accepting such a huge gift. That's when he explained his plan. I'm not giving you the money, he said. I'm setting up an education fund in your name. Your parents will be the trustees until you turn 18, but the money can only be used for your college expenses. That way, they'll feel involved in your success, but the money stays protected. The fund started with $50,000 when I was 16. Grandpa Joe continued adding money from his business profits, sometimes a few $100s, sometimes a few thousand, depending on how the shops were doing. By the time I graduated high school, there was nearly $75,000 in the account. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but combined with student loans and part-time work, it would have made college completely manageable. I should have seen what was coming. Jessica graduated high school 6 months after me with a 2.1 GPA and no plans for the future. She moved back in with my parents and spent her days sleeping until noon, watching reality TV and going to parties with her high school friends who were equally directionless. That summer, she met Derek at some bar downtown. Derek was 24, worked intermittently in construction, and rode a motorcycle that was worth more than most people's cars. He was handsome in that dangerous way that some women find irresistible, and Jessica fell head over heels immediately. Within 2 months, they were engaged. Within 4 months, they were planning a wedding. It's going to be so beautiful, Jessica gushed to anyone who would listen. We're thinking maybe 200 guests, open bar, live band, the whole thing. Derek deserves a perfect wedding. He's never been married before. The wedding planning consumed our entire house for months. Jessica had spreadsheets for everything: flowers, catering, music, decorations. Mom took vacation days from her job at the bank to help with arrangements. Dad spent his weekends driving Jessica around to look at venues and taste cakes. Meanwhile, I was trying to finalize my college plans. I'd decided on State University, which had a great engineering program and would only require about $15,000 per year from the education fund after scholarships and financial aid. The rest I could cover with student loans and campus jobs. That's when my parents sat me down for a family discussion. We need to talk about your college money, Dad said, using that serious tone he reserved for bad news. Jessica's wedding is going to cost more than we anticipated, Mom added quickly, like she was ripping off a Band-Aid. The venue alone is $12,000, and that's before catering, flowers, photography. I felt my stomach drop. What does Jessica's wedding have to do with my college fund? We've looked at all our options, Dad continued. We can't afford to give Jessica the wedding she deserves without using some of the education money. Just temporarily, of course. We'll pay it back as soon as we can. That money is specifically for my education, I said, trying to stay calm. Grandpa Joe set it up that way for a reason. Mom's face got that pinched look she always wore when someone questioned their decisions about Jessica. Your grandfather wanted to help the family, and Jessica is part of this family too. Besides, you can take out student loans like millions of other kids do. Jessica only gets married once. She's 20 years old, I said, and she's known Derek for 4 months. Maybe she should wait and pay for her own wedding when she has a job. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Mom started crying about how I was being selfish and unsupportive. Dad launched into a lecture about family loyalty and how disappointed Grandpa Joe would be if he knew I was trying to keep Jessica from having her dream wedding. The worst part was that they genuinely seemed to believe their own logic. In their minds, my college education was something I could figure out on my own, but Jessica's wedding was a family emergency that required everyone to sacrifice. How much are you talking about taking? I asked, hoping it might be something manageable. Around $40,000, Dad said. Maybe a little more, depending on final numbers. More than half the fund, gone. For one day. For a wedding between two people who barely knew each other. I tried every argument I could think of. I reminded them that Grandpa Joe had specifically created the fund for my education. I pointed out that Jessica and Derek could have a nice wedding for much less money, or they could wait and save up for the kind of wedding they wanted. I offered to help Jessica plan a budget-friendly celebration that would still be beautiful and meaningful. Nothing worked. They had already made up their minds. And in their view, I was being unreasonably stubborn by not immediately agreeing to help my sister. The final blow came when Mom said, "Besides, we're not asking you to give up college entirely. You'll still have about $35,000 left, and you can take loans for the rest. It's not like we're leaving you with nothing." 2 weeks later, I watched them transfer $42,000 from my education fund into Jessica's wedding account. Jessica's wedding was indeed spectacular. She wore a $3,000 dress, carried flowers that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month, and danced to a 12-piece band at a country club that looked like something from a movie. Derek looked handsome in his rented tuxedo, and Jessica glowed with happiness as she posed for photographs that cost $2,500. I was there, of course, dressed in the cheapest suit I could find, smiling for family photos, making small talk with relatives who kept asking about my college plans. When people asked why I looked unhappy, Mom would say I was just nervous about starting school. The marriage lasted 11 months. Derek, it turned out, had some issues with commitment and fidelity. Also drinking, also gambling, also the basic concept of showing up to work consistently. Jessica discovered all of this gradually, starting with mysterious charges on their joint credit card and escalating to finding him passed out in their apartment with another woman. The divorce was finalized the week before I finished my freshman year of college. By then, I was already struggling financially. Even with the remaining money from the education fund, student loans, and working 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore, I was barely covering my expenses. I lived in the cheapest dorm available, ate ramen noodles for most meals, and bought used textbooks that were often 2 editions out of date. Meanwhile, Jessica had moved back in with my parents and was talking about going to community college to find herself. Mom and Dad were fully supportive, of course, and offered to help pay for her classes since she was starting over after such a difficult experience. When I came home for Christmas break, I found Jessica's old bedroom had been converted into an art studio. She was exploring her creative side by painting abstract canvases that looked like someone had thrown paint at a wall. The paintings covered every surface of what used to be a guest room, and Mom was already talking about helping Jessica organize a gallery showing. "She's so talented," Mom gushed, showing me a canvas that was entirely red with some yellow squiggles. "This one is called Emotional Journey. Doesn't it just speak to you?" What it spoke to me was about $500 in art supplies that could have helped cover my spring semester textbooks. That Christmas dinner was when they brought up Derek's drinking problem and how Jessica was dealing with some trust issues from the marriage. They were paying for her therapy, of course, and she was also seeing a nutritionist to help with the stress eating she'd been doing since the divorce. "She's been through so much," Dad said, cutting into his prime rib. It's going to take time for her to get back on her feet. I bit my tongue and focused on my mashed potatoes. Spring semester of sophomore year was when things got really tight. My dorm costs went up, my textbook expenses were higher than expected, and I had to cut back on work hours to handle a particularly demanding course load. I called home to see if there might be any possibility of accessing more money from what remained of the education fund. Actually, Dad said, sounding uncomfortable, we need to talk to you about that. Jessica has met someone new, and they're thinking about getting married. His name was Travis, and he was apparently everything Derek wasn't. Stable job, nice car, college degree, ambitious plans for the future. Jessica had been dating him for 6 months and was convinced he was the one. The thing is, Mom explained when I came home that weekend, Jessica learned so much from her first marriage. She knows what she wants now, and she wants to do this wedding right. But she's also older and more mature, so she wants something more elegant than last time. More elegant, apparently, meant more expensive. The venue Jessica had chosen was a historic mansion that charged $20,000 just for the space rental. The catering was from some high-end company that specialized in artisanal farm-to-table cuisine. The photographer was an award-winning artist whose wedding packages started at $8,000. She deserves this, Mom said firmly when I pointed out the costs. After what Derek put her through, she deserves a beautiful wedding with a man who really loves her. What does this have to do with my college fund? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We need to borrow the rest of the money, Dad said. Just temporarily, of course. The rest of the money. All $33,000 that remained. You're joking, I said. They weren't joking. Jessica's already been through one divorce, Mom explained. She can't go through the stress of planning a budget wedding on top of everything else. And Travis comes from a good family. His parents are successful, educated people. We need to show them that Jessica comes from a family that can provide for her properly. I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. They wanted to take the last of my college money to impress some people they'd never met. For a daughter who had already proven she made terrible decisions about marriage. What am I supposed to do about school? I asked. You're smart, Dad said. You'll figure it out. Take more loans, get more scholarships, work more hours. College kids do it all the time. College kids whose parents don't steal their education money do it all the time, I corrected. That made Mom start crying again. We're not stealing anything, she sobbed. We're a family, and families help each other. Your grandfather would be so disappointed in your attitude. My grandfather would be furious that you spent his money on weddings instead of education, I shot back. That was apparently crossing a line. Dad's voice got hard and cold. Your grandfather is gone, and we're the trustees of that fund. We've decided this is the best use of the money for our family. If you don't like it, you're free to figure out your own path. 2 weeks later, they cleaned out the education fund completely. Jessica's second wedding was even more extravagant than the first. The flowers alone cost $4,000. And the cake was some architectural masterpiece that required its own delivery truck. Jessica wore a different $3,000 dress, white again, which I thought was pushing it for a second marriage. But nobody asked my opinion. Travis seemed like a decent guy, actually. He had a good job in marketing, treated Jessica well, and seemed to genuinely care about building a stable life together. At the wedding, he gave a speech about how lucky he felt to find Jessica and how excited he was to start their future together. I hoped it would work out for them. I really did. It lasted 8 months. Travis, it turned out, had some unrealistic expectations about marriage. He expected Jessica to contribute financially to their household, keep their apartment reasonably clean, and maybe show some interest in activities that didn't revolve entirely around shopping and social media. Jessica, for her part, had some unrealistic expectations about marriage, too. She expected Travis to fund her lifestyle, handle all the boring adult responsibilities, and never question her decisions about spending or socializing. When Travis suggested they create a household budget, Jessica called him controlling. When Jessica spent $800 on a purse while they were behind on rent, Travis called her irresponsible. When Travis worked late to catch up on projects, Jessica called him neglectful. When Jessica went out drinking with her friends 3 nights in a row, Travis called her immature. The divorce was messier than the first one. There were arguments about the apartment lease, disputes over wedding gifts, and a prolonged fight about a joint credit card that Jessica had maxed out buying clothes for her new single life. By the time it was finalized, I was halfway through my junior year and drowning in debt. Without the education fund, I'd been forced to take out maximum student loans, work 30 hours a week at 2 different jobs, and live in a shared apartment off campus, where I slept on a mattress on the floor and ate generic cereal for most meals. My grades were suffering because I didn't have time to study properly. My health was suffering because I couldn't afford decent food or regular medical care. My mental health was suffering because I was constantly stressed about money and exhausted from working so much. Meanwhile, Jessica was back in her art studio, painting through her divorce recovery and talking about maybe starting an Etsy shop to sell her creations. When I came home for Christmas that year, Mom pulled me aside. Jessica's been having a really hard time, she said. This divorce hit her much harder than the first one because she really thought Travis was different. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, because what else was I supposed to say? She's thinking about trying online dating, but she wants to work on herself first. Maybe take some classes, learn some new skills, travel a little bit to broaden her horizons. I waited for the other shoe to drop. The thing is, therapy is expensive, and classes cost money, and she really needs a change of scenery. We were thinking maybe she could take a trip to Europe for a few months. Nothing too extravagant, just something to help her heal and figure out what she wants to do with her life. That sounds nice, I said carefully. We were wondering if you might be willing to help out a little bit. Just a small contribution to her healing journey. Maybe a few $1,000s? I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. You want me to pay for Jessica to take a vacation in Europe? Mom's face tightened. It's not a vacation, it's therapeutic. And we're not asking for much, just whatever you can afford. I can't afford anything, I said. I'm working 60-hour weeks and living on ramen noodles because you took my college money for Jessica's weddings. Plural. Those weddings were family investments, Mom said stiffly. And you're being dramatic. Plenty of students work their way through college. Plenty of students' parents don't steal their inheritance to fund their sisters' fairy tale fantasies. That Christmas dinner was the last time I spoke to them as family. I finished college through sheer stubborn determination and went deep into debt doing it. By graduation, I owed $87,000 in student loans, had maxed out 3 credit cards, and was so burned out from working and studying simultaneously that I felt like a zombie most days. But I had my degree, and more importantly, I had my freedom. I moved across the state and took a job with a manufacturing company specializing in industrial equipment. The pay was decent, the work challenging, and best of all, I was 300 miles away from my family's drama. For the first time in years, I could focus on building my own life instead of watching my parents fund Jessica's latest crisis. The manufacturing job led to an engineering firm, then a defense contractor. Within 5 years, I was making good money, had paid off my debt, and was saving for real goals. I bought a small house, got a reliable truck, started a retirement account, and took vacations I actually paid for myself. Meanwhile, according to my aunt, Jessica had burned through 2 more relationships, briefly pursued acting in California, and was back home working part-time at a boutique. My parents were struggling financially. Dad took a pay cut after downsizing, Mom had expensive health issues, and they'd refinanced their house twice covering Jessica's support needs. I felt bad for them, genuinely. But I also felt vindicated. They'd chosen to invest in Jessica's dreams instead of my education, and now faced the consequences while I built the stable life they'd made harder to achieve. 3 years ago, my aunt called with predictable news. Jessica was getting married again. 3rd time's the charm, right? Ryan owned his own business and seemed mature enough to handle Jessica's baggage. The wedding would be smaller and more intimate. Only 150 guests and $25,000. My parents committed to paying most of it. 6 months later, another call. The engagement was off. Ryan wanted a prenup and equal financial contributions. Jessica found this unromantic and insulting. My parents lost $8,000 in non-refundable deposits. That's when my phone started ringing with Mom's number. The first contact in 3 years. I let it go to voicemail. Hi, honey, it's Mom. We really need to talk to you about something important. Please call us back when you get this. The voicemails kept coming. Dad left messages too, asking me to please return their calls because there was a family situation that needed to be addressed. After a week of ignored calls, they showed up at my house. I was working in my garage when I saw their car pull into my driveway. They looked older than I remembered, and tired. Dad's hair had gone completely gray, and Mom looked like she'd lost weight in an unhealthy way. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home, but another part of me was curious what could possibly be so important that they'd drive 300 miles to see the son they'd written off 3 years ago. I walked out to meet them in the driveway, wiping grease off my hands with an old rag. Hi, Mom said nervously. You look good. Healthy. Thanks, I said. What do you want? Dad cleared his throat. We need to talk to you about Jessica. Of course they did. Jessica's going through a really difficult time right now, Mom continued. The thing with Ryan fell apart, and she's having trouble bouncing back from it. She's seeing a therapist, But it's expensive, and with Dad's reduced income and my medical bills, I waited for them to get to the point. The thing is, Dad said, Jessica wants to go back to school. She's decided she wants to become a social worker so she can help other people who are struggling with relationship issues. That's great, I said. Social work is important. But school is expensive, Mom added quickly, and she'd need to quit her job to focus on her studies full time. We simply don't have the resources to support her through a degree program right now. They both looked at me expectantly. And, I said, and we were hoping you might be willing to help, Dad said. You've done so well for yourself, and Jessica really needs this chance to build a career and move forward with her life. I stared at them for a long moment. You want me to pay for Jessica's college? Not pay for it entirely, Mom said quickly. Just help out. Maybe cover her tuition or living expenses while she's in school. We know you're successful now, and this would really mean a lot to the family. The family, I repeated. You're still our son, Dad said. We know things have been strained between us, but family is family. Jessica has learned from her mistakes, and she really wants to make something of her life now. I looked at these people who had raised me, who had chosen my sister's wedding fantasies over my educational future, who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, and who were now standing in my driveway asking me to fund Jessica's latest reinvention. Do you remember my college fund? I asked. They both shifted uncomfortably. That was a long time ago, Mom said. You took $75,000 that my grandfather left for my education and spent it on Jessica's first 2 weddings, I continued. Then you told me I was selfish for being upset about it. We were trying to help Jessica build a stable life, Dad said defensively. Those marriages could have worked out. But they didn't work out, I said. And now you want me to pay for Jessica's education after you made it impossible for me to afford my own. You turned out fine, Mom said. You got your degree, you have a good job, you bought a house. It all worked out. It worked out because I went into massive debt and worked myself into the ground for 6 years, I said. It worked out despite what you did, not because of it. They looked frustrated, like I was being unreasonably difficult. Jessica needs this opportunity, Mom said. She's finally ready to be serious about her future. Jessica has needed a lot of things over the years, I replied. 2 expensive weddings, therapy, art supplies, trips to Europe, and now college tuition. How much of your retirement savings is left after funding all of Jessica's needs? The look on their faces told me everything I needed to know. We made some sacrifices, Dad admitted. But that's what parents do for their children. For one of their children, I corrected. You made sacrifices for Jessica? You made me sacrifice for Jessica too. We raised you to be independent, Mom said. Jessica needs more support. Jessica is 30 years old, I said. If she wants to go to college, she can take out student loans like millions of other people do. Like I had to do. Student loans are so expensive now, Mom protested. The interest rates are terrible, and she'd be paying them back for decades. Yeah, I said. I know. That's when Dad tried a different approach. Look, we know we made some mistakes in the past. Maybe we should have handled the education fund differently, but we can't change that now. What we can do is move forward as a family and support each other. Where was the family support when I was eating ramen noodles for every meal and working 60 hours a week to pay for school? I asked. You never asked for help, Mom said. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. I asked you not to take my college money. You took it anyway. I asked you to consider less expensive options for Jessica's weddings. You ignored me. I asked you to treat your children equally. You told me I was selfish. We did the best we could with a difficult situation, Dad said. No, I said. You did the easiest thing. You took money from the child who wouldn't make a scene and gave it to the child who would throw a tantrum if she didn't get what she wanted. They stood there in my driveway looking like I'd slapped them. I think it was the first time anyone had ever clearly stated what they'd actually done. Jessica is your sister, Mom said quietly. She's family. Jessica made her choices, I replied. Multiple expensive choices that you funded with my future. Now she can live with the consequences of those choices, and you can live with the consequences of enabling them. So you won't help? Dad asked. I won't help, I confirmed. They left without saying goodbye. 2 months later, I got a call from my aunt. Jessica had decided not to pursue social work after all. Instead, she was dating a new guy named Sam, different Sam from high school, who owned a landscaping business and was really supportive of her artistic dreams. They were talking about moving in together. 6 months after that, they were engaged. My aunt mentioned that my parents were looking into a home equity loan to help pay for the wedding, since Jessica wanted something elegant but not over the top, to reflect her more mature perspective on marriage. Third time's the charm, right? My aunt said. though she didn't sound entirely convinced. I didn't respond to that. I wished Jessica well, genuinely hoped she would find happiness, and silently thanked my younger self for having the backbone to walk away from that cycle of dysfunction. Last month, my aunt called with an update I'd been expecting for a while. Jessica and Sam had broken up 3 weeks before the wedding. Sam, apparently, had discovered some things about Jessica's financial habits that concerned him. Specifically, he'd learned about the credit card debt she'd accumulated during their engagement, the money she'd borrowed from my parents for wedding planning, and her expectation that he would handle all their future expenses while she focused on her art. She really thought he was different, my aunt said sadly. She's pretty devastated, but that wasn't why she was calling. Your parents are in real trouble, she continued. They took out a second mortgage to pay for Jessica's wedding expenses, and now they're stuck with all those deposits and payments with no wedding to show for it. Your dad's job situation isn't getting any better. Your mom's medical bills keep piling up, and they're looking at possibly losing the house. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, not because I was tempted to help, but because I hated watching people I'd once loved destroy themselves through their own poor decisions. That's terrible, I said, and I meant it. They're too proud to ask you directly, my aunt continued, but I know they're hoping you might be willing to help out. Just a loan, maybe, to get them back on their feet. I'm not giving them money, I said. I understand why you feel that way, my aunt said, but they're your parents, and they're really struggling. They've been struggling for years, I replied, but every time they had to choose between financial stability and funding Jessica's latest crisis, they chose Jessica. Now they're facing the consequences of those choices. Jessica is struggling too, my aunt said. She's moved back home and she's really depressed about this latest breakup. Your mom is worried about her mental health. Of course she was. Jessica is 32 years old, I said. She's had 3 engagements, 2 divorces, and countless opportunities to build a stable adult life. At some point, she needs to figure out how to handle disappointment without requiring the entire family to sacrifice their financial security. But you're doing well, my aunt pressed. You could help them without it really affecting your lifestyle. That was probably true. I'd been promoted twice in the past year, my house was almost paid off, and I had a healthy savings account. I could probably write a check that would solve my parents' immediate financial problems without significantly impacting my own security. But that wasn't the point. I could help them, I agreed, but helping them would just enable them to continue making the same mistakes. They would use my money to stabilize their situation. Jessica would start dating someone new, and in 6 months we'd be right back here talking about engagement rings and wedding venues. Or my aunt was quiet for a moment. So you're just going to let them lose their house? I'm going to let them face the natural consequences of their own financial decisions, I said. The same way they let me face the natural consequences of their decision to spend my college money? That's cold, she said. It's honest, I replied. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen looking out at my backyard and thinking about cycles and consequences and the difference between helping someone and enabling them. I thought about my grandfather, who had worked his ass off to build something valuable and tried to pass it on to someone who would use it wisely. I thought about the choices my parents had made and continued to make, always prioritizing the immediate crisis over long-term stability. I thought about Jessica, who at 32 still expected other people to fund her dreams and fix her mistakes. And I thought about myself at 18, watching $75,000 disappear into wedding flowers and photographer fees while I figured out how to pay for textbooks. 2 weeks ago, my parents called me directly for the first time in 3 years. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Hi, Dad said when I picked up. His voice sounded older, more tired. We need to talk. I'm listening, I said. We're going to lose the house, he said without preamble. The bank has started foreclosure proceedings, and we don't have any way to catch up on the payments. I'm sorry to hear that. Jessica's lawyer says there might be a way to fight the divorce settlement from her second marriage, Mom added. She was on speakerphone, and her voice sounded strained. Travis might have to pay her some kind of settlement if we can prove he was emotionally abusive. Even now, even facing homelessness, they were looking for ways to extract money from Jessica's failed relationships instead of asking Jessica to take responsibility for her own life. That sounds like a long shot, I said. The lawyer wants a $10,000 retainer, Dad continued. If we can come up with that money, Jessica might be able to get enough from Travis to help us save the house. And there it was. The ask I'd been expecting for 3 years. You want me to pay for Jessica's divorce lawyer, I said. It would be a loan, Mom said quickly. We'd pay you back as soon as the settlement comes through. What if there's no settlement? Silence. There will be, Dad said finally. Jessica's lawyer seems confident. Jessica's lawyer wants to be paid whether he wins or loses, I pointed out. His confidence doesn't cost him anything. So you won't help? Mom asked, and I could hear the tears starting. I took a deep breath. For 28 years, you've made it clear that Jessica's needs come first in this family. Her wedding dreams were more important than my education. Her emotional crises were more important than my financial stability. Her happiness was more important than my future. That's not true, Dad protested, but his heart wasn't in it. It is true, I said, and you know it's true. You've never once asked me how I'm doing, whether I need help, or what my goals are. But you've called me 3 times in the past year asking for money for Jessica. You're our son too, Mom said. Then treat me like it, I replied. Stop seeing me as Jessica's backup funding source and start seeing me as a person who has his own life and priorities. Jessica is family, Dad said. So am I said. But you only remember that when you need something from me. There was a long pause. When Dad spoke again, his voice was defeated. So we're on our own. You're exactly where I was when you took my college money, I said. You'll figure it out, just like I did. Take out loans, work extra hours, make sacrifices. You'll be fine. We're too old to start over, Mom said. I was 18 when you made me start over, I replied. You'll manage. I hung up before they could respond. Yesterday, my aunt called with the inevitable update. My parents had filed for bankruptcy and were moving into a small apartment across town. Jessica was staying with a friend while she looked for her own place, since the friend's lease doesn't allow long-term guests. Jessica's really struggling, my aunt said. She applied for some jobs, but without a degree or much work experience, her options are limited. That's rough, I said. She's thinking about going back to school after all. Maybe community college this time. Something more practical. Good for her. The thing is, student financial aid is complicated when you're over 30. She might need a cosigner for loans or some help with application fees and deposits. I didn't respond. I know you're angry with your parents, my aunt continued. But Jessica is your sister. She needs a chance to build a real life for herself. Jessica has had plenty of chances, I said. She's had more chances than most people get in a lifetime, all funded by my parents' retirement savings and my college money. At some point, she needs to create her own chances. But what if she can't do it alone? Then she'll learn to do it alone, or she'll accept the natural consequences of not doing it. My aunt sighed. You've gotten hard. I've gotten realistic, I corrected. There's a difference. After we hung up, I went out to my garage and worked on restoring an old motorcycle I'd bought at an auction. It's a 1975 Honda that needs a lot of work, but I enjoy the process of taking something broken and making it functional again.